Now that you have some background into the ways in which fears and anxieties are acquired and maintained, we can now start to answer the question you've undoubtedly been asking yourself throughout all the previous modules, which is, how do I rid myself of these fears and anxieties? How do I get rid of that monkey off my back once and for all? In an effort to answer this question, we're going to have to return to Pavlov's laboratory for a moment for a quick review. Pavlov was able to elicit the salivation response of his dogs by preceding the presentation of the dog food with the ringing of the bell. That is, he rang the bell, presented the food, and the dogs began to salivate. After doing this a few times, he discovered that he could elicit the salivation response simply by ringing the bell and skipping the food altogether. In fact, the dogs began to salivate as soon as they experienced any associated stimuli with their food, such as the sound of the can or food cabinet door being opened. The bell became known as the conditioned stimulus, and the salivation response was known as the conditioned response. This entire process is referred to as classical conditioning. And as discussed in the last module, although classical conditioning can involve something pleasurable, it can also have negative consequences that can result in anxiety and fear. And as we demonstrated, if the food in Pavlov's laboratory was replaced with an electric shock, where every time the bell was rung, the dogs received a startling electric shock to one of their paws, the dogs would quickly develop a negative reaction to not only the sound of the bell, but to any of the other stimuli associated with their food. Not only would the dogs attempt to escape the painful shock, they would quickly learn to avoid the situation altogether and thus avoid their food. So back to the question of how we rid ourselves of our fears and anxieties. This brings us to the law of the extinction of anxiety. This law states, if a conditioned stimulus, like the sound of the can of food or food cabinet door being opened, is presented in the absence of an unconditioned stimulus, like the shock, the anxiety associated with the conditioned stimulus will decrease, and that unconditioned stimulus will no longer motivate behavior. So applying this to our example of Pavlov's laboratory, in order for the dogs to overcome their fear of the sound of the can of food or food cabinet door being opened, it will be necessary to consistently expose them to these stimuli without giving them the shock they experienced when they acquired their fear. Although the dogs will initially be afraid of the stimuli associated with the presentation of their food, after only one or two full exposures to the sound of the can or a cabinet door being opened or any of the other stimuli associated with their dog food, without receiving the shock to their paw, they will no longer be motivated by these events. They will once again be able to experience all the various stimuli associated with their dog food without being afraid, and thereby no longer avoiding the situation. Although more complex, applying the principles of the extinction of anxiety to mastering the fear of flying has proven to be extremely effective. The aviation environment has many stimuli that are just like the examples of the stimuli in Pavlov's laboratory. Veteran aviation psychologist Dr. Michael Tamaro refers to those things in the aviation environment which in and of themselves won't hurt you, but are signals of impending disaster as the lights, buzzers, and bells of the aviation environment. The aviation environment has many stimuli that are just like the lights, buzzers, and bells of Pavlov's laboratory. Some of these stimuli include various sounds, turbulence, general questions as to how airplanes are able to fly, questions about the competence of the flight crew, feelings of being trapped, and many other stimuli. Many fearful flyers interpret these events as signals of disaster, which is one cause of fear and discomfort. The more knowledge that you have about the way the extinction of anxiety works will be tremendously helpful to you when in the face of the various lights, buzzers, and bells of the aviation environment. The extinction of anxiety is greatly helped by keeping your muscles relaxed and changing your perception about flying, by increasing your knowledge about various aspects of the airplane and the overall aviation environment. You will learn more about muscle relaxation, airplanes, and the aviation environment in the modules to follow. In conclusion, it is important for you to keep in mind that self-doubts about being able to overcome your fears and anxieties about flying is to be expected. Solving this discomfort takes time and a lot of practice. Consistent exposure to the objects or environments that cause the discomfort, without receiving the electric shock, so to speak, is necessary in order for the extinction of anxiety to take place. Additionally, the sense of dread that people experience at times throughout the extinction process is unavoidable and to be expected, as it is part of our internal built-in alarm reaction. As you proceed throughout the following modules, I encourage you to review the various principles presented here and in the previous modules often. I'll see you in the next module.